Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first of its kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey everybody, Mark and Steve on the PBSE podcast. This is episode 235. And this is a pretty cool topic for us because we are just wrapping up our what's turning out to be an 18 episode advanced training in our D2C Academy, which is a special part of Dare to Connect that is really advanced work for those who have been with us in D2C more than 6 months or longer. We get into really advanced, deep work. And a course that we're just finishing up is preparing for formal disclosure.
Video course. It's the first that we know of its kind. Video course on that on planet Earth.
So. Yeah, it's been a real challenge.
It has. It kept growing, and now it's, as you can tell, it's almost 5 months long.
Yeah, and
if you watch one a week.
Keeping ourselves disciplined to its only preparation for the formal disclosure process, because actual formal disclosure has a lot of moving parts, and we highly, well, we don't highly recommend. We demand that anyone who attempts it must do so with a qualified therapist. And so it's timely that we would get this question that came in because we've been immersed in this advanced course we've been creating. I'm going to just summarize what this is: an addict in very new recovery. And I could feel it was really heartfelt what he submitted to us. He's been in a relationship for about 21 years. 10 of those years he's been married, and they have beautiful children that are part of this as parents, not just spouses, but parents. And he's finally gotten to the place where he really wanted to get serious about recovery. He has a long history of sexual addiction combined with alcoholism, and recently got serious and is working with a therapist, is getting into 12-step, is doing a lot of really good stuff. And he reports that they recently had an actual disclosure day that was facilitated by a therapist, and that took place. And then, we're going to talk about some things that we don't have all the details, but some concerns with how he describes it. Yeah. And the bottom line question is, okay, I'm in therapy, I'm in 12-step, I'm dealing with recovery from my alcoholism and my sexual addiction. We had a disclosure day. Now I want to know how to best support my partner going forward. And so we're going to talk about that. Yeah. So as we jump into this, let's just say right out of the gate, all disclosures are not created equal.
For sure.
Right? Steve, how many definitions of, quote, disclosure or disclosure day have you and I heard over all the years that we've been doing this.
I mean, my goodness, there are so many, and it's a hard. I mean, it's going back to us, creating this course for Dare to Connect. Mark and I were really nervous when we did it, and it took a lot of planning to even begin. And then, like I said, it's been 4 or 5 months in the creation of it because disclosures are such a pivotal thing in a relationship, or have the potential, I guess you could say, to be such a pivotal thing. If done correctly, they can be one of the most amazing turning points in a relationship during the recovery process following betrayal. If done incorrectly, they can be a bullet to the head when it comes to the relationship. And for example, I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, or a CSAT, and the training for all CSATs on formal disclosure, when I went through training nearly 10 years ago, so I just imagine it's only expanded, if anything, was an entire week, 8 hours a day, with some of the smartest therapists and clinicians on the planet teaching us how to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's no small order to sit down for a couple to do that. They're usually months in preparation if done correctly. There's a lot that goes into it.
A ton.
Yeah.
That's why we could only do a course on helping people prepare to go into
Yes.
the process. We would never dare to do a course that
No,
actually
that just gets them ready with all of the
just,
basics ready, so
yep,
they take it to a therapist and then go through the whole process with
just
them.
gets them ready, not actually
Oh.
doing it. No way. And there were a couple things that this guy shared with us when he sent in his question about Disclosure Day. The one that really jumped out at us, first of all, he says, I wasn't fully prepared. So he went into Disclosure Day. I wasn't fully prepared. And he talks about how, not all the truth came out. It sounded like it was kind of sloppy. And so that's where we wanted to start. What does it mean to be fully prepared to actually enter into a disclosure? And I mean, he wasn't fully prepared. What would fully prepared look like?
Yeah.
We wanted to run through that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, ideally in a disclosure setting, the first thing is that in most cases, it's recommended that you and your partner have separate therapists, first of all, who communicate in tandem with a release of information during the process. And then there are a series of quote unquote, I guess you could say, assignments or responsibilities that both the addict and the partner take on as a part of that, because this is a disclosure. Obviously, as the name implies, a lot of that process is the addict, getting honest, becoming honest, and then sharing that honesty regarding an entire history of his sexual acting out. Possibly some other things added into that, depending on circumstance. But that is by no means the only piece. That's what people oftentimes think of when they hear the term. There is, for example, we begin the formal amends process following the disclosure. During the formal disclosure process, the partner who has experienced betrayal, in the case of Mark and I, we go through a series of letters that make up essentially an impact letter, right, on the part of a partner who has been betrayed. Who they prepare that in concert with their therapist. There are really strict boundaries in place, right, that separate how much we talk about different aspects of recovery while the disclosure preparation process is going on. So it's a fairly complicated dance with a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, it takes months to prepare for a formal disclosure. Right, we are actually going to get together for the addict sharing of the disclosure letter. I mean, months minimum.
Well, and the other thing that should be noted is it's not just the assignments that are tied into that. It's also the attitudes and skill sets.
Yes.
So, for example, for an addict to be able to go through the formal disclosure process, he has to develop out skills that historically for him usually have been quite limited. Things like being able to be open with himself and with other people, having a handle on things like gaslighting, minimizing, blame shifting. These are all things that are needed for accurate accountability, right? Communication has to be to a certain point in the relationship, and there also has to be some sort of kind of I guess you could say, a critical mass of trust, so that in order for the addict to be able to trust partner and the therapists involved that this is not going to be a drawn and quartering execution experience, and for the partner to be able to trust both the therapist as well as the addict that what I'm hearing here today is accurate and sincere, and that what we're doing here really is going to be a change going forward.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah,
there's a whole lot of things.
Another really significant part of the disclosure process, which was a big deal for me and for really every addict that we've ever worked with, Steve and I, is all of the shame resilience work that must go into an addict preparing for disclosure day. Right? You have to
Mm.
understand from the time we were very young, what did we become very good at to stay safe and to deal with difficult people and difficult life? We became very good at hunkering down, going isolated, shutting down our feelings, not being transparent, wearing masks, wearing facades, trying to act and speak in ways that we thought others would be pleased with us, right? All the ways that we weren't transparent, all the ways that we were not fully forthcoming. We have to work through all of those old habits, really part of a very part integrated into our survival system. We have to work through those things in order to be able to even get to the idea of disclosure.
Yeah.
So all the shame resilience work, all the transparency skills, how to become an open book and become honest. Big parts of preparation. You can look at that and just say, wow, that's huge just by itself.
Absolutely.
It's true.
Well, like we indicated, this D2C Academy course is basically designed to take a coupleship, instead of having to go through months and months and months and months with new therapists to facilitate a disclosure process. In the D2C Academy, this 18-week course allows people to do a lot of the preparation work first, so that we can cut down that process with the therapist component exponentially, while still obviously they need to be involved and have things tailored that way. But it just allows them to be able to have all that stuff ready so that we can, take that journey and make it not so long.
Yeah.
But as we look at this disclosure that this guy described, I mean, our hearts just go out to both of these people in this coupleship, right? Because there were clearly, just based on inference, like you said, we don't know all this, all of the circumstances, but definitely some things that were, I guess, concerning from what, best practice in the clinical world teaches about a formal disclosure and the things involved versus what happened. This disclosure apparently was a total of 45 minutes.
Just a regular 45-minute therapy session, apparently.
Never in the course of my career have I facilitated a disclosure less than 2 hours long.
Yep.
And usually that is kind of Russian.
Usually that 2 hours
Oh.
then is paused and turns into additional session or sessions to complete.
Sometimes, yeah, we will do a follow-up session for like the amends portion and things like that. But I mean, they're typically very detailed. It doesn't sound like there was as much preparation as should have been done on his part in terms of getting him ready for that. It was kind of navigated on the fly. He doesn't say anything about how well his spouse was prepared, so all we can do is kind of infer, but I really worry about that side of things as well, for her.
Yep, how much preparation she had. And then because it was just a 45-minute session and he didn't even have a chance to fully disclose everything. They walked away, as you might imagine. She had many more questions.
Yes.
And he knew he hadn't been completely transparent. So he says a couple of days after disclosure, he doesn't say whether they came together with a therapist or not. It seems to appear that it was just the two of them. And so a couple of days after D-Day, they came together to do more sort of disclosing.
Without anybody.
I don't think so. And then she had more questions and he answered them. And then 2 days after that, they did it again.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we won't get into all the nuances of it here today. It's not to say, and we want to be careful here because it sounds like, frankly, based on what this addict described in his submission, that it probably went about as well as one could expect given the circumstances. The problem when the less structure you have to a disclosure, the less formality there is to it, and the less you have somebody impartial guiding the process with clinical training, the more a disclosure the more unknown variables you bring into the process, right?
Yeah.
Disclosure day is, we talked about this on the very first week of our formal disclosure D2C Academy course. A formal disclosure is a good way to look at that, is like doing surgery on a relationship. Even with the most skilled people involved, it's going to be difficult. It's going to cause damage, and it's going to require some bounce back healing following the process, right? Even like if you're having like a tumor removed or something like that, right? There's still a healing, even though it's a good thing. right? It's part of treatment. There's still a healing process. There's still some collateral damage that happens with that process, right? Other things are affected. It's a very good analogy for what happens in a disclosure. And the more you don't have it facilitated correctly, the duller the scalpels being used are, and the less advanced the machines taking care of things are, and it just you can cause all sorts of scarring and problems and even additional unnecessary trauma without you know
Yeah,
uh,
it's
having
true.
it navigated.
And
So
as we mentioned, we talk about there are far more parts than just the disclosure itself
yes,
by the sexual addict, right? There's the three foundational footings of a disclosure, which is disclosure itself, the impact letters, and then the amends process. Right? It's kind of a three-legged stool that is just has to be part of this, and all three of those have preparation, a lot of preparation associated with them.
yeah,
Now, and we're not going to get into all of that. What he asks is, okay, let's assume, for example, that disclosure happened in the healthiest way. Let's assume that all three parts of it were included over a number of weeks or even or several months. His question is, now what? How do
yeah,
I support my betrayed spouse going forward? And we wanted to say a couple of things about that as we kind of finish up the second half of this podcast. We need to understand that, and this was very much true for me as a guy in recovery, that this entire disclosure process is not a one and done. Because what did my addict brain want to say? Whew, okay, we got through that whole thing. Check that box. Now we can get on with life or get back to normal or right. And this might sound strange to those listening, but the way Steve and I look at the entire disclosure process is as an intimacy doorway that we walk through as a coupleship. Intimacy. I'm going to allow you, probably for the first time in our relationship, and probably for the first time in my life as an addict in recovery, I'm going to allow you, partner, to see into me. Intimacy. All masks pulled off, no holding back. I'm going to allow you to see me in my the whole of me for the first time. We're going to Steve, what do you and I say? If disclosure is approached in the healthiest way with qualified professionals involved, this will probably be the most intimate experience that the coupleship has ever had in their relationship. This is an intimacy doorway we walk through. But it's just the beginning. It's the doorway that we walk through. And now what? Once
yeah,
through that door, we continue on the path of intimacy and connection. And so, what does that look like?
yeah. Well, and there's a lot to that, right? Because it is just a beginning, like Mark said. It's an evolution, and the first, I think, you kind of hit on it, Mark. But I think that the first most important piece, speaking as two guys who had to kind of reinvent the wheel because we were stubborn, is that you have to adopt that mentality for not just as the addict, but as the coupleship. Because I think many couples are at risk of that mentality if it's not clearly laid out, right? That we can both kind of let our hair down, like when really it is a starting point. But even beyond that, right? If we talk about Mark, going back to these three components, we have this immense process that in many cases is ongoing for a whole set of reasons, right? There are, for example, some amends that we make that, amends is a whole other like 5 podcasts all by itself. But if we look at the amends process or the restoration process, where we go through a good faith effort to do our very best as the offender in the relationship, as the addict betrayer, uh, we go through and we make a good faith effort to do our very best to restore that which we stole, that which we took, that which we robbed, that which we destroyed, right? Whatever vernacular fits most appropriately. And that amends process oftentimes, both in terms of the I guess you could say the concrete amends, but also the living amends, they go on for a long time. Living amends, for example, is a lifelong commitment,
Yeah.
right? That's part of that promise and that commitment that says, not only am I going to do these things to change, here are the things that I'm going to keep in place to ensure that I never take us down this road ever again, right?
Uh, Yeah.
Um,
And I think it's important. I know I looked at the disclosure process early on. It was, oh geez, here again, just like happened to me when I was a kid, Mark gets to basically get kicked in the butt. Once again, he
mm,
screwed up. He's totally blown it, and now he gets to take his licking.
mm,
And I really saw disclosure as that. I don't see it that way today at all. In fact, as I continue to be transparent and quote disclose all kinds of things, my emotional inner life, my deepest thoughts and feelings, when I make mistakes, all the things I continue to disclose to my spouse to this day, right? Through couples check-ins, through all the things that we do. I see this whole disclosure and being transparent process as what? First, it was a way for me to finally come to know myself for the first time in my life. I had hidden and tried to keep, out on a shelf or behind, the closed doors, all of the honesty and transparency about Mark as a whole. I was only going to show certain parts of that, what I considered to be safe or what I thought people would still be able to like me and be pleased with me and be impressed with me. So I wasn't going to share my whole self. So what did I cut myself off from? I had closed myself off from the authentic Mark, the genuine Mark, the true me, with the good, the bad, the ugly, and all of it. Today, why I see ongoing disclosure and living amends is such an important thing to me is I want to continue to protect that inner sanctum of what is authentic to me. Who is
yep.
my higher self? Who is my true self, my genuine self, my authentic self? I want to nip in the bud anything that would put that in danger, that would cause me to give little pieces of it away as I did for most of my life. I want to stay authentic and I want to continue to get better at it. I want to continue to spiral upward in that authenticity process. And what will allow me to do that? To continue to disclose, to continue to be transparent, to continue to be honest. I see that as a very positive thing now, whereas for much of my life, it was just awful to think about, right? Facing the music, being in the bright spotlight. They're going to get me again. And
Yeah.
I don't see disclosure like that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it's very true. It's we're coming up on the 4th of July holiday here in the United States, which is Independence Day. And it's interesting that we're just having this discussion about amends. My wife and I were talking about this a while ago. I'll link the 4th of July thing in just a second. We've had this conversation many times, but it came up fairly recently again, and I clarified a little bit more for her of where sometimes when we are having discussions about difficult topics, I will acknowledge my part in causing some of the issues in our marriage surrounding addiction. And this last time my wife actually spoke about it, she said, "You don't need to keep talking about that because I mean I've been sober for 10 years." She said, I appreciate you being open about that, but you don't need to keep mentioning that. Like I've moved on, we've moved on, like and I told her, I said, and for a while I did struggle with the shame, right? After disclosure and in early recovery. I don't feel ashamed about those things and have not in a long, long time. I acknowledge those things, one, because I feel like that is part of my living amends to my wife. But here's the other thing too. Isn't just something that we make to our partner. It's something that or to people we've wronged. It's something we make to ourselves. Mark actually did an amazing group about this in our Sunday 12-step support group, also part of Dare to Connect. It's one of the 4 sessions that you have access to as part of your subscription, and had a great discussion about that. Generally did the same thing with step 8 with our partners. And for me, acknowledging those things is helpful for me because like on the 4th of July, right? Every 4th of July, I always watch the different festivities, country leaders lay wreaths and other things at different war memorials around the country, for example, in the United States. And, why do we do that? Why do we spend money on these monuments? Why do we create monuments to World War II or other really difficult things? Because I know that for many of us, kind of like with betrayal, what would we want to do? Just kind of like, let's move on,
Yeah.
you know? Those monuments for me, sharing those things on a frequent basis with my wife, with my clients, with all of you on PBSE, I think it has the same impact for Mark. Those are sort of, I guess you could say, monuments of a sort for us in our mind, because just like with physical monuments, we have those monuments are there because we have to not forget.
Yep.
It's important not to forget what happens when we let go of boundaries, or when you let evil go unchallenged, or when, X, Y, or Z happens. Those monuments help us to remember where we've been, and in turn help us to guide where we're going. And for me, I know myself far too well. There will always be two brain cells in the back of Steve's brain that would just love to rub themselves together and say, hey, you can just be normal. You can just do what every other guy on the planet does. Porn's no big deal. If it pops up, it pops up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Masturbating, like just going down the list and just being like, you could just be quote unquote normal. And I'm not. And I can't ever forget that I'm not. And
Yeah.
that's not good or bad. It just is. It's neuroscience. I'm an addict, right? There will always be that part of my brain that will always have a risk of going there. I'm in remission from cancer for 25 years. I'm in remission from addiction for 10. With both, I don't live my life drastically different had I not dealt with those things, but I do keep a watchman on the tower. I get a yearly blood test that most people don't get for the cancer, and I attend meetings and work a recovery program that most people don't do for the addiction. It's just the
Yeah.
reality of it.
Well, and that leads right into his big question: how do I best help her going forward?
Yeah.
It's we have three words in our notes here: consistency, consistency, consistency. Right? Am I, as a guy in recovery, how do I continue to make what we call living amends? Well, I'm going to continue to lean in and show empathy and sit with her in her pain, even if that pain rises up. My wife and I will talk sometimes about things that happened 20 or 25 years ago that were painful for her. And if they come up for her because of a certain trigger, I lean in and I sit with her in it and feel privileged to do so, quite frankly. Am I going to be leading out, leaning in, but also leading out as an addict? No longer going to wait to be reminded, no longer going to wait for her to get upset for me to be motivated. I'm leading out. I'm proactive. I'm preemptive. I can see things coming on the horizon that I know from history are going to be difficult for her or for me. And I have a plan, and I put it together, and then I go and let her know I have, and I offer it up, and then I follow through, right? Leading out, proactive recovery, proactive connection. That's how I try to create the best environment for her healing that I can post discovery day.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's it's a great sentiment. And I think, to add to that, guys, how does that work? So we stand and we're empathetic, we're connecting with, we're proactive in providing, seeking, and creating safety for our partners, not just around those past things, but what does it point us towards? And this is an ongoing one for me, admittedly, but getting ahead of and of those same things that got us in trouble in the past with communication, right? Keeping an eye on and working on my stonewalling, being defensive, getting defensive, um, leading out with empathy on new issues when they come up, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. Sometimes for me, it's much easier to remember empathy for that past stuff, but like the current, it's like, well, that's something else. Well, it's not. It's the same.
Well, and not getting stuck in the trap that, hey, I'm sober, so that should be enough. I'm sober.
Oh gosh, yeah, I won't
Yeah.
share that story, but yeah, I've heard many a guy over time. I'm sober. What else do you want from me?
Yeah.
And then the wife who says, "Congratulations on finally providing the baseline minimum of what you promised me on our wedding day."
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's crazy.
So it's and again, guys, that self amends cannot be underestimated, right? It is an ongoing piece, right? When we do self care, for example, we haven't talked about this recently, or maybe on the podcast ever this way. But if I'm looking at making amends to myself about all the damage I've done, what is part of what got us into this whole addiction mess in the first place? Lack of self care, lack of self love, devoid self worth. Logic would then dictate and determine that we would be making an active effort to providing ourselves with those things today.
Yeah.
Going forward.
Yeah,
since that's what got us in that mess in the first place.
being isolated, hunkering down, not being in tune and in touch with my deep feelings, not
Unregulated, unresolved trauma.
yeah,
right?
not peeling back the layers and making amends to myself. I'm going to start doing all of those things one step at a time, right? I'm going to try to increase my capacities and my knowledge and my skill set, but I make amends by taking action. I make amends by protecting that inner sanctum, which is the authentic, genuine higher self. I'm not willing to sacrifice that guy anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not willing to give pieces of that true self away anymore. Right. And so this whole process. I hope you're hearing how positive it is. It's an
Yeah.
upward spiral that just gets better and better the longer that we stick with it. For ourselves individually, for our partners healing, and for us as a coupleship. It just continues to improve.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we appreciate you sending us in your submissions, your questions as always, and we love to get to and address them as quickly as we can. Gonna sound like one of those phone trees, but for immediate support, we would invite and lovingly but strongly encourage you to check out our Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples. We have an ever-growing repository of ongoing new content, 4 live sessions a week, over 30 hours of live content a month, a repository of D2C Vault videos that continue to grow, and now D2C advanced courses in addition to support groups, all for the cost of 1 or 2 therapy sessions, depending where you're located on planet Earth. There's nothing quite like Dare to Connect out there. Come level up wherever you're at with us at daretoconnectnow.com. We'd love to get you a free 2-week trial on that and help you come see where we can help you take things to a better place from wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for joining us today at PBSE. Like we said, if you've got questions, send them in. We are a couple of months behind on those. Or if you come and join D2C, we can answer your question Wednesday, which is our next live session.
Absolutely.
And if you ever want to search through our 234 episodes, go to pbsepodcast.com and click on the blog. And in the blog, there's a search function, and just put words or terms that you're looking for, and you'll see a lot of stuff pop up.
Absolutely.
From the past.
All right. Everybody, have a great day. Have a great holiday, and we will catch you in the next episode.
All right. Take care.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.